Hello, Joann.
Hi, Nick.
Hi. Thanks for agreeing to come and talk to us with the Chair of Complexities and Humanities at the UM6B. We're very happy to have you with us. Joann Whalen, you are a professor at McGill University in Montreal at the Department of Natural Resources and Services. You're also an affiliate professor here at UM6B with the Chair of Soil Sciences. And you hold a PhD from Ohio State University. You're a professional agronomist in Quebec. And we were discussing earlier that you have been elected president of the American Society of Agronomy. And so you've been here at the Chair of Soil Sciences for how long?
Right. I've been at the Chair of Soil Sciences for over a year.
A year, okay.
And it's been a really remarkable opportunity because the Chair of Soil Sciences, it's situated in the whole College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. And it's an appropriate place for it to be, actually, because the Chair of Soil Sciences, as you can sort of get the impression from the picture, the motif that we have as our design, it has the blue for the sky, and it has the green for the plants. It has the brown for the roots and the soil, and then underneath they've got it's sort of cupped in this black zone, which represents sort of the water and the hydrologic cycle. So soil exists inside of the environment. And we often think of soil as being for the use of agriculture and for the use of growing food for people or food for animals, also fiber and also fuel in some way. But soil is every place in the whole environment. So whether it's in an agricultural sense or whether it's in the general environment in a more natural sense, the soil is every place. So the Chair of Soil Sciences does sort of represent an opportunity to look at soil across all types of natural and managed ecosystems. So that's some of the work that we're doing.
Right. So I read that your research focuses on fertility, on the soil fertility, on the health of soil ecological and the agro-ecosystems. But let's take a step back. Just tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what sparked your interest in agronomy, and how you came to this focus on soil itself.
So, I came from a family that were farmers, so we always farmed. We had, operations with dairy and beef cattle. We had huge fields and gardens, and we knew that underneath all of this green and these animals that we were producing, there was a base, a foundation. I never thought at the beginning that I would be a soil scientist, but when I got to university, and I started to study in the College of Agriculture that I got my first bachelor's degree from, I began to recognize the importance of the soil as being a foundation for the production of all of the plants and animals that we depended on. And so that's what led me in my honors project as an undergraduate towards soil science, and particularly measuring the value of fertilizer amendments such as compost in soil. So I began in this way and then pursued more education at the master's and at the PhD level, expanding into the fields of soil biology, biochemistry, and eventually soil ecology, which led me to really recognize the soil as a system that encompassed biological, chemical, and physical reactions, and that worked together in a very intricate way to support a lot of plants and animals.
Okay. And just to go into the research that you are conducting here at UM6B, can you tell us a bit about that? What is your current research focus?
Yeah, so a lot of our current research focus at UM6P is on two main areas. So we continue our work on soil fertility, and we're doing that by looking at the development of custom fertilizers. So what is a custom fertilizer, and how does it differ from a regular old fertilizer? Well, maybe we should even step back and just say, what is a fertilizer? So from my perspective, a fertilizer is any type of material that brings nutrients that plants need to grow. And again, we could look at the picture we have in front of us here of this beautiful little seedling that's growing in a black soil. And we seem to think by looking at this picture that soil must be very rich. It must be fertile, and it must be providing the things that the plant needs, which are the water, because all plants need water, and the nutrients that it needs to grow. For the sunlight, it needs sun, and for the carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, it needs the air. So those are kind of a given. but the soil really helps provide the water and the nutrients. The water depends on the rain and the irrigation we put, and the nutrients depend on any type of fertilizing material we use. So the fertilizers we could use could be fertilizers that are purchased. They could be fertilizers that we recycle, and we've done research on all types. The difficulty we have sometimes with fertilizer is to synchronize the provision of nutrients from the fertilizer at the time the plant really needs them. And so that's a big sort of issue or a big sort of challenge for fertilizer technologies. So with the custom fertilization, what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to match the release of the nutrients that the plant needs to the time in which the plant actually needs them.
Because the fertilizer doesn't, if you put it like a couple months before, it doesn't necessarily stay in the soil?
That's exactly right. That's the issue. If you put fertilizer into the ground at the wrong time of year, suppose you put it in the middle of the winter when no plants are growing, the fertilizer is not going to just sit in the soil and stay there, because a lot of fertilizer is first water soluble, so it dissolves, and then it might move around with water. It might actually leach down through the soil. It goes away from the zone where the plant roots actually need it. It might go through some other reactions. It might turn into a gas. It might go up into the atmosphere, and that's not good either. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to get the fertilizer put at the right time, but we also don't want it to dissolve too quickly, for instance. We don't want it to dissolve when the plant is still a seed, because then it could do these reactions. It could go into the air, it could leach down below the root zone, and the plant will never use those nutrients. So the custom fertilization is using a fertilizer that's been adapted a little bit. So it dissolves slowly, and maybe it dissolves in response to what the plants are telling, because the plants, under natural conditions, send a signal to the soil when they need nutrients. And the reason they do this is because the natural nutrient cycle uses microbial activity. So the biologicals in the soil are actually stimulated or not stimulated in response to the plant needs. So when plants are growing very quickly, they send these compounds, which we call exudates, down into the roots and out into the soil. And those compounds contain carbon, which makes microbes grow. And when microbes are growing, they start to release nutrients that exist in the soil. They turn them over and they make them available to the plant. So if we have this system in which plants will signal about when they need nutrients, we need fertilizers that recognize those signals and respond to them.
You would need the fertilizers or the microbes.
Well, we're trying to do both, because we're actually having fertilizers that are combined with biologicals. So we put microbes in with the fertilizer, and so now we have an organism that responds to the plant, and also they help to dissolve the fertilizer at the right time because they've received the communication from the plant. So we're trying to use the natural capacity of plants to communicate their needs to make the fertilizers and the microbes respond to those needs. And that's how custom fertilizer works. It's amazing, eh?
Very impressive. And so when you're talking about that, I'm thinking, what plants are we talking about? Can we work on all types of crops, or are you focused on certain types of crops related to the needs of, for example, Moroccan agriculture? How does that work?
Yeah, so when we do this, we think about custom fertilizers as being adapted to various types of crops. Now, the first crops that we start with are generally the staple crops, the ones that people rely on most for their nutrition. And so those would be generally the big crops. So rice, wheat, and corn are big, major staple crops in the world. After that, we need some pulse crops. So those are like beans, lentils, chickpeas, peas, those type of crops we also look at. The third type of crop that's very interesting to us is what they call oilseed crops. And so those are crops that give us like the oils that we use for cooking and other things. So we might focus on canola, which I know about from Canada because it's one of our biggest oil seeds that we produce, and it was developed in Canada. The second one is a crop like, we could use a crop like peanut because you could make oil from the peanuts. You can use soybean because it also has an oil. So there's a variety of crops that we choose as kind of the target ones because of their importance for human nutrition and the abundance that people require for their diet that they prefer.
And so you touched a little bit on the complexity of this natural system.
Yeah.
You said in the natural system. So why don't we have a natural system?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we obliged to put these nutrients? Aren't they in the soil already?
They are. You're absolutely right. There are nutrients in the soil. And the thing that we'd like to do with the nutrients in the soil is, again, make that communication between the plants, the microbes, and the nutrients to make the flow go in the right way and at the time the plant needs. If we relied on this natural system, then we will grow a certain amount of plant. But that amount might not be very much. It might not really be enough to be economically viable for the farmer because it might produce 1 or 2 or 3 tons of grains per hectare, which is not really very optimal. Because if you only produce a ton of grain per hectare, and normally the farmer would really like to produce, let's say, 6 or 8 to be economically viable, 1 versus 8 still requires the farmer to drive the tractor across the field, to purchase the seeds, to put the time and effort and labor into growing that crop and making it grow up and harvesting it and sending it to the factory for processing and all of this. So the farmer would prefer to grow more in this land area. And because the natural nutrient supply is not enough to grow the highest yield you can get to, they try to optimize by putting the fertilizers to make up the difference. So this is the reason for fertilization. And the other reason is, if you think about it in a global scale, if the units of land only produce 1 ton of grain per hectare, you need a lot more units of land to produce enough for people. It's better, we think, in agriculture to concentrate the production on certain small areas of land and be very, very productive on those lands, rather than extend the agriculture over so much more of the world. Because then, unfortunately, we start to get into natural habitat of animals, we start to worry about biodiversity loss, etc. So if we can take our plots of agricultural land and be very efficient and very careful on those plots, it's better, in fact, for the whole planet.
Okay. I remember reading a little bit about soil life, and also read the importance of things like mushrooms.
Yes.
Not sure how.
Yeah, mycorrhizal.
There you go, mycorrhizal.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of the it's not the microbial life itself. It's more the general biological life.
There's an incredible. I'm so glad you brought them up. There's an incredible diversity of microbial life in the soil. There's bacteria, and there's archaea, and there's these mycorrhizal fungi and other types of fungi you just mentioned. There's insects. There's protists. There's nematodes, there's earthworms. In my research group, we've done research on quite a lot of these organisms, and we recognize the importance of all of them. The mycorrhizal fungi are a particular case and very interesting because virtually all agricultural plants have this association, and they get an advantage from associating in their roots with these fungus because the fungus essentially extend the rooting system. Their bodies, they're called hyphae, are very long, extensive, almost like roots, but very, very thread-like. They're very thread-like extensions that extend into the soil far beyond the scope of a regular root. So if I thought about my finger as being a root, imagine a white thread, and it can extend for many meters beyond my own finger. And so that now allows the plant to have access to resources that are far beyond the extent of its own root development. So these root systems that might go in the soil have extending from them all these thread-like growths. And along those thread-like growths, water is being moved by the cohesion and the tension that roots extend. Because as you know, roots are always pulling water out of the soil. And so the pressure is enough to, along the whole extent of these mycorrhizal fungi, also pull some water. So the mycorrhizal fungi help the plants get more water, and so they can survive a drought better. And in the water are some dissolved nutrients, and so they also move along to the plant. So these mycorrhizal extensions going into the soil are very, very highly beneficial to the plants. And so it's a natural thing that happens that helps make these well-managed agricultural lands very highly productive and very able to sustain plants even under harsh conditions.
Right. So resilience in the system.
It does create resilience.
It really shows how these systems are complex networks between different elements. It's really fascinating, and I just now understood how what you were saying by. So I was always wondering how plants and trees, let's say an olive tree or a palm tree, in an environment that's extremely dry, arid. Say, okay, it will get water, but I know that, for example, that the aquifer is very low. So even if they have big roots, they don't go down 50 meters. But it's what you were saying, how it's through different connections.
It's through these different connections.
Okay.
So it's really very tremendous how plants have adapted themselves, and it's happened over millions of years. These adaptations and these associations have naturally occurred to help plants to be able to thrive in what looks to us like extraordinarily difficult conditions.
Mm-hmm. And so we mentioned, you talked about earthworms and nematodes?
Yes, nematodes.
Which are a type of earthworm?
A type of very small worm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've read also that they're very important in the soil, that often it's an indication of healthy soil to have earthworms, nematodes. And tell us a bit more about their role and their utility. And I'm just curious also about Morocco. Is because I remember just last weekend I was in the countryside, and and when I was thinking about our interview, I looked at some land and I took some earth, and I didn't see any earthworms there. But I mean, it was like a patch of land that was not cultivated. So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about earthworms first, and then I think we'll go to nematodes. So the earthworms is a particular favorite creature for me because I did my PhD about the biology and ecology of earthworms, and so it's a pretty fun topic. Earthworms exist in virtually every place in the world, except the Arctic areas where it's too cold and it's covered in ice or in permafrost. So they are an animal that lives in more adapted to wetter areas of the world, and that might be why in this part of Morocco that you went to, you didn't really see them very clearly. It might have been just a little bit too dry for them, but they haven't disappeared. In fact, they're most likely there, but they are in what they call a quiescent state. And so earthworms have this incredible ability, even though they prefer a wet, moist environment, they have an incredible ability to withstand harsh conditions by doing one of two things. So when it's very dry, they will burrow themselves deep into the soil, and they will curl up into a little ball, and they cement a whole bunch of soil around them as a protective coating, almost like an armor, and they wait. They wait until it rains. And then they come out, they meet other earthworms, they have a great time together, they eat, they reproduce, they have a lot of fun together, and then when it dries down again, they have reproduced. They have produced these little tiny eggs. They look like a small lemon, actually. They're called cocoons, and that's the offspring. So they may survive to the next generation when the rains come again. And the adults, meanwhile, go back down and they do this quiescence, and they wait with their armored shell on until the conditions get good.
Great. And so we just talked about water, droughts, and I know that you've worked on the impact of climate change on soil health. So can you tell us a bit about that? How is this climate change? How this ongoing drought, for example, in Morocco the last 5-6 years, how is that impacting soil health?
So the soil health is sustained in some ways because, again, the organisms have a tremendous resilience. And we have noticed that particularly this year because if we compare to last year and the year before, when we had very little rainfall, we thought, you could think, looking at the place, there's nothing in the soil. It's all brown. There seems to be nothing growing. Perhaps it's dead. People occasionally come to this conclusion, I don't see anything, it must be dead. But we know that it's not dead. The organisms are simply holding on. They're waiting for better days. And we had enough rain this spring that the desert came alive again. We could measure the respiration of the organisms coming back to life because there was enough water. So these organisms that we find in the soil, when the conditions are appropriate for their growth, they are active and they help plants to grow and they help plants to produce well, and that feeds people and it feeds animals, and so it feeds all of us.
Okay, right. And I also saw that you worked on the question of residues and bio-based residues, and how, what can you tell us? Bio-based residues is basically what is the question of compost and recycling for fertility. Is that the idea?
So we came to a situation in many parts of North America in which the organic wastes during a period of time were being landfilled, and this seemed to us to be not necessary. Because if we could simply recover some of those organic wastes and we could process them, in some way to make them less odorous, less smelly, less wet, we could recycle the nutrients and the organic material contained in it. And so in places like Europe, in Canada, in the United States, many municipalities now have programs in which a town will put out bins and ask everybody to collect all of their leaves, all of their sticks, all of their household residues, and put it out by the curb to be collected. It then goes to a composting facility, and through heat treatment and some pasteurization and chipping and so on, they turn it into a final product that then has nutrients and residues, material that can go back into agricultural lands. This works very well for household waste. Now, we're working on a project right now that deals with industrial organic waste. So this is things that are a little bit more tricky. This is like the municipal wastewater treatment plant. All the things we don't want to talk about. Everything we flush down the toilet that has to go and be treated.
Right.
In many places, it was traditionally just discharged into waterways, and the water will wash it away. But most places now think this is not the best solution. It's not appropriate to just discharge sludges and things into the environment because they are not really great. They might contain some pollutants, they might contain some other things. So you should recover them, but you have to treat them in a certain way so that they don't have pathogens or parasites or harmful materials, and they can be reused. So we've been doing a project in which municipal waste and industrial waste, such as from pulp and paper mills, are treated appropriately and then used for sometimes agricultural land if they meet all the quality standards, but if not, they can be used for reclamation of mining sites. So we've done that as well. So places where there's been a very big disruption from mining activities and you have a lot of tailings and they're not going to grow anything because they're very poor and very rocky, and it doesn't look like this soil. It looks like just a pile of rocks.
Right.
You could put these residual materials and start to create an organic layer with life in it that will help to revegetate and help to rehabilitate those lands. So some types of parkland, some types of wasteland, some types of industrially impacted lands, mining sites, etc., can be used with these materials. It can be rehabilitated and reforested and just revegetated. Yeah, so we work on that. In some ways, sometimes this can actually turn into another industry because some of those fast-growing trees they put on to stabilize and revegetate the mine tailings can be harvested and go back into circulation as veneers, pulp and paper, biofuels, etc. And so you start to create a virtuous cycle instead of simply taking waste materials and putting them in the ground and covering them up.
Right, that makes total sense. Yeah, absolutely. And also, I read that you work or have worked or still working on research around biochar. As a total layperson around this, it's fascinating because I know that it's related to this sort of this terra prata or terra nera in Amazon.
That's right.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? This fascinating material that was invented in South America.
Exactly. Well, this was a really nice discovery by a colleague of mine, Johannes Lehmann from Cornell University, in which they had been investigating some very interesting soils they found in the Brazilian Amazon, probably about 20 years ago. They came across these soils, and the soils in the terra preta soils were unique because the soil of the Amazon region is normally a very reddish color. It has this very distinctive red color because being in a jungle that gets a lot of rainfall every year, what tends to happen is you accumulate a whole bunch of iron oxides, and they have a very distinct red color. But as they went to another region on the Amazon, they found soils that looked like these ones. They were black. They said, my goodness, how did these soils look so different? There's no other reason.
And so sorry, just this would be like in the jungle. It's not like in cultivated places.
Well, there's villages, and there's people living there, and so this is not like kind of far away from civilization. There are people living there, villages, and people are farming, and they are growing their own food to feed their families and so on. But in some areas, instead of having this red soils, very deep soil profiles of red soils, they found the black soil, and so they were wondering, why are they black? And they asked the people living in the area, why are the soils black here? And the people explained, oh, well, for about 1,000 years, our ancestors have figured out that if you take some of the tree residues and the household residues and you burn them at not a very high temperature, you don't burn them to make them all volatilize and get all the energy back, but you burn them in a controlled way, you will get a charcoal. And if you take this charcoal and you mix it back in with the soil, it adds extra nutrition to the soil and it makes the plants grow better. And if you keep doing this over a long period of time, it kind of works into the soil. And so in the depth of the soil, you will see to quite a deep depth, maybe 50 or 60 centimeters, you will see, I will show with my hand, like maybe this deep, you will see this black layer. And those soils are very distinct because compared to the other soil with the red, the black soils grow much better plants. The plants grow bigger, the fruit is more tasty, the grains are more numerous, they're more nutritious. So understanding what the villagers have been doing, they took the technology back to the United States and they introduced it to certain companies, and people realized, oh, we can do this in a more high-tech way. And so a whole industry is born out of this interesting discovery that was being done by indigenous people in the Amazon. And so they have tried these biochar amendments, which you can make with any type of organic material. In these Brazilian villages, it was being done with tree residues, bark, bones of animals, and other wastes were being used. But you can use rice husks, you can use coconut shells, you can use, sugarcane bagasse, you can use any type of residual material, you can use animal manure, you can use what you want. So the process is a thermochemical process, so it has to do with not complete burning. So you don't completely burn the wood to ash. You burn it under controlled conditions without oxygen, and then you have this like charcoal fragments that now can be crushed up into the right particle size or into a very fine particle if you want, and then it can be reapplied to agricultural land. It's effective, but not in every soil type. So we'll tell you what soils it really works in. It works in soils with a low pH, so acidic soils of the world. It's very, very effective in because it has a nutritional effect and it also acts to neutralize the pH. So it's highly, highly effective in acidic soils. It works very, very well in the tropical regions of the world. It's also quite helpful in some of the salt-affected soils. For us, we did research on it in Canada. Our soils are good in Canada. So it was okay, but it didn't do anything spectacular because our soils already have a very good fertility. But it was very helpful in soils that were sandier, that needed some organic matter, in soils that were acidic, that needed some neutralization. So it's helpful in certain parts of the world. And
in Morocco, would it be something, certain parts? Or?
They've tried it in Morocco, and it's had some benefits. It's had some benefits here. Yeah.
Because I read also that biochar has a property in water retention as well.
It does.
Because of the
The pore structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you were burning these organic materials, what you can remember is that inside of plants, the way that things move inside of plants is through a vessel system. So plants are very porous. They have holes in them, okay? So I mean, a plant may look solid to you, but if you break it apart and you look under a microscope, you'll see a system of pores which allows water and nutrients and sugars and other things to move around in the plant. And so when you burn it, you end up retaining, with the lack of oxygen and the controlled burning, you retain this porous structure. And so those micropores and the nanopores in the plant hold the water. So it has this extra water retaining capacity. So it's very interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I also, I have other questions. Just wanted, if you could tell us a little bit, what from your perspective, working here and working in Morocco, what are some of the main challenges in terms of soil fertility in Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
maybe beyond? We often say in Morocco and Africa, but Africa is huge, you know. So Morocco, maybe West Africa. I don't know. At least Morocco.
You know, one of the main things that we've been focusing on is we've been focusing on Morocco and the Sahel region, and that's been the focus of a lot of our work because the issues are often quite similar in those regions. So the things that we notice is we need to pay very special attention to water management, so that's the first thing, and so building our soils up so that they have enough, just like this soil, that sort of black, rich organic matter material, whether it's through biochar or through organic amendments, helps to hold on to the water and keep it in the soil. It helps also fuel the microbial life, so we get those nice thread-like, you know, mycorrhizal fungi helping to get the water back to the plant. The first thing is water. The second thing is just regular fertility, making sure that the soil has been tested so we know what its supply of nutrients is, and using specialized or customized fertilizers when necessary to supplement and make sure that the plants get all the nutrition they need. The third thing that we are working on quite a lot in this whole region is building up the organic material in the soil for the purpose not only of improving the soil, but to decarbonize. Because soils have a tremendous capacity for storing carbon. And so that will alleviate or mitigate the climate change effect. Soils of the world are predicted to actually hold on to more carbon than all the plant life in the world. And so if we can make the soils to hold on and retain carbon, then we've actually buffered that effect of climate change that's happening every time that fossil fuels and other sources of CO2 go back into the atmosphere. So we're working on that as well. Those are the main things, I would say, that we're working on from the perspective of soils and soil health in this region.
Interesting. I saw just last week, I think in Marrakesh, there was a conference, a symposium on forests, and noticed that. I looked at the program, and they were talking about setting up a program along the coast of Morocco, to set up a sort of forest along the coast, planting a lot of trees. The idea that would help to increase the rainfall a bit more naturally.
Yeah.
This idea, does that sort of make sense, that having trees would actually increase the rainfall where places?
Yeah, it does actually make a lot of sense because we know that vegetation is important for the hydrologic cycle. And so there's this short-term thing of when you have green zones, and I mean, they even try this in cities to make parks, and they make green spaces, and they have green areas, and they say if there's, you know, the best thing you can do, if you have anything you can do in your life, is to plant trees. This is really true because trees not only stabilize the land, they capture the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and help transmit it down into the soil through their root systems, but they also act as a kind of like a heat island. So they lower the temperature, and in doing so, they help condense the water that is around in the atmosphere. And so they attract, because rainfall works on the basis of like differential gradients. So having more trees actually shortens up the hydrologic cycle and makes it more likely that you're going to have rainfall. Big empty spaces of bare land don't often get rained on.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I remember that this conference had a sort of motto, which was raise a tree and plant water, or something like
Oh,
that.
that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. They talk about green water quite a lot in the literature now, and
Okay.
that's what they mean by green water.
Okay. And just to sort of finish up on our conversation today, and I hope we'll get a chance to speak more later. Can you speak a little bit to your experience at UM6B and Benguerir? How's it been?
Yeah.
Work and life here?
Yeah, well, Benguerir is an amazing city. I mean, they call it the Green City, and it truly is. They have created it in a way that the buildings and the whole environment is very energy efficient. There's solar power in the Green Energy Park, like everywhere. UM6P also is an area of high technology, which makes it very exciting. So the laboratories here are extremely well equipped. We have one of the biggest data centers and cloud computing facilities in the whole of Africa. I think it's second best in all of Africa, and also very highly ranked in the world. So there's great capacity to do an amazing amount of research, and we've been using some of the computing facilities actually for carbon modeling. So trying to figure out where carbon can be stored in the lands of Morocco and other places using sophisticated computer models and using the capacity that exists here. What else can I say about Benguerir? It's a very friendly place. People are nice. The city continues to grow. The university continues to grow. And we just find it almost like a new frontier of opportunity here in Benguerir. That's not only been attractive to us coming from North America, but we find a great deal of happiness in the fact that it's attractive for people coming from all of Africa. And even now we're working on projects where we're trying to connect with folks from Europe and also from Asia who are very interested in the work that's going on here to try to create some type of synergies and partnerships.
Great.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, Joann, thank you so much for this interview. It was really very interesting.
Thank
Pleasure
you so much.
speaking to you. And see you soon.
Good luck with the chair of Complexity, Science, and Humanities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.